have to speak up, but we can hear you.
We can't see you though.
How's that?
There! Ta-da! Ta-da!
Should I put my mask on?
No, you can, it's all right. It's all right, Lone Ranger. We're just crowded in here.
Did you guys catch the Biden press conference?
No, this morning?
Yeah, they had somebody wiping off the podium after each speaker.
All
Really?
right.
Yeah, well, I just came out of quarantine, Mike.
I know.
I've been
I'm
up.
sorry.
I've
Well, I'm
been up.
glad you're out.
Yeah. Thank God for Jeff Costello's nice little cabin up at the lake. Jeff, thank you so much. Anyway.
My pleasure, Rich. You would have done it for any one of the rest of us, so it was a no-brainer.
Well, you got my message about it made me dream up a new program. Cheryl always gets on me for dreaming up new programs, but
We'll blame it all on Jeff.
so my idea, it's such a wonderful place. And I was talking to Rod Ambrose and I said, we worry about artists from outside of the area and having a artist in residence, but boy, there are people here who live here, artists and writers, who would love to shoulder seasons and not have to worry about mowing their lawn or shoveling their walk. Okay. What do you think, folks? Should we start?
Trouble hearing, Rich?
Pardon? Should we start? People are still slowly getting on.
Yeah, let's wait a couple more minutes maybe. Emily
Okay.
might be with.
Okay.
Emily was on.
Emily was on?
Yeah, she's here as Lewis. Right?
Say it again, Marky.
Lewis Whitesides.
No,
Is that
actually,
Emily?
I'm Emily's dad.
Oh, okay.
That Emily's there.
Yeah, can you see me, guys?
We see you, Emily.
Hi, Emily.
Hello.
So good to see you.
It's so good to see you.
Hi, Emily.
So,
Hi.
what do you think, folks? Should we go for it, folks?
Let's go.
Are you guys ready to go?
Sure.
Let's do it.
Okay. Well, Mike, I'm going to let you MC, Mike, because you're the farthest away from us. And you did some prep work here. And I think you want Emily to start, but I'm not sure. Is that correct?
Actually, I think we were going to start with basically, this is all about Parkinson's. And we have myself, who's a person with Parkinson's, Marky Pitts, who's a person with Parkinson's, and somewhere in the mix is Eileen Trudeau, who's a person with Parkinson's. In fact, she's had Parkinson's diagnosed almost 29 years ago. So
Wow.
She's a real veteran. And of course, we have my adopted daughter, Emily Whitesides, who is a physical therapist and is trained in the Big and Loud exercise program here applied to Parkinson's. And she's going to give us some technical stuff toward the end. So Marky, you're the new kid on the block. What do you think of this thing?
You want me to start?
Yes, please.
Go ahead, Marky.
Okay. Well, basically, I was going to share my journey with Parkinson's. And as Mike has said before, if you know one person with Parkinson's, you know one person with Parkinson's, because it's so different in each individual. So,
Excuse me, Marky, I'm just going to step in to say, please mute your audios if you're not speaking, because we've got connection problems here and that'll make it easier, okay?
Got it? So anyway, I was formally diagnosed with Parkinson's just about 3 years ago. And generally when a person is diagnosed with Parkinson's, they have about 20% of the dopamine that their brain needs. So it's really pretty low by the time diagnosed. And my journey with Parkinson's, however, began a good 20 years ago. And it was probably early 2000s when I was diagnosed with a loss of sense of smell. And I didn't know that at the time, but that is, the decreased sense of smell is very common in Parkinson's and often among the earliest symptoms of Parkinson's. So I never associated it with Parkinson's because I worked in a medical facility next to the anatomy lab where cadavers and formaldehyde, and we had ethylene oxide and all kinds of chemicals. So never dreamed about Parkinson's. Then in about 2009, I had my first episode of swallowing problems, which were esophageal dysphagia, which is also very common in Parkinson's. And that's basically spasms of the esophagus where you can't swallow. So swallowing was the second major issue. Then a few years later, I developed a right arm tremor. And in 2015, I was diagnosed as having essential tremor, which is basically a genetic mutation. And the difference with essential tremor and Parkinson's tremor is that the essential tremor tends to activate when you're physically active, whereas the Parkinson's tremor tends to get worse when you're trying to rest your arm or your leg or wherever your tremor is. And so we kept trying different treatments to treat the essential tremor. I tried beta blockers for a while, tried acupuncture, Botox, none of which really worked. So then as 2015 on progressed, there were additional symptoms such as difficulty walking, slowed movement. I got the shuffle down really good. And Mike, you know what I mean by the shuffle. And I was doing a lot of consulting and traveling, and I began to have trouble getting from one gate to the next gate to catch the next plane. I would try to go really fast and I would just freeze like my feet were in molasses and I couldn't move. And that became a problem. However, I did find out that all the airlines have wonderful courtesy services and I started using them. Instead of quitting traveling, I used their chair services. Then I was also doing a lot of speaking on issues related to animal research, and I was beginning to get evaluations back that people couldn't hear me and that my voice it had a monotone to it that it didn't before. So the softer speech, the monotone voice, those are very common signs of Parkinson's. Handwriting was another issue. I got so that my handwriting got smaller and smaller and more erratic, and I had difficulty with finger ability. Such things as buttoning buttons. I've learned that you really look at buttons before you buy something, and you make sure that the buttons are and the buttonholes are a good size so that you can handle them. Also, I developed stoop posture, leaning forward, having trouble with balance, falling, and the simple act of getting out of a chair, which seemed like no problem before. And that's one thing that I hope Emily will talk a little bit about with the Big and Loud program. It really was so helpful to me in learning to get out of chairs, which sounds like such a simple thing. But one of the things about Parkinson's is that it's hard to diagnose, and it's basically diagnosed by the elimination of a lot of other things. For instance, in 2018, I had a brain scan, and what they were looking for were lesions in the brain, which would identify MS or other diseases. But with Parkinson's, that doesn't show, and there's no way to really measure the dopamine in your brain. So the diagnosis of Parkinson's is based partly on whether and how fast motor symptoms progress, and whether and how soon certain other symptoms appear. Before reaching a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, doctors must rule out all other conditions that could potentially cause these symptoms. So you see why the process is so slow in diagnosing. And then some of the ongoing symptoms I've had since the diagnosis: anxiety, stress, fatigue, sleep problems, swallowing, UTIs. These are all things that we need to deal with. And so what's your approach in dealing with this? I learned that for me, I needed to focus on what I could do and try to be as active as possible. I went to swim therapy, walking, yoga, the LBST, Big and Loud program, which Emily will talk more about. Rock Steady Boxing is another program we don't hear, but I learned from Eileen that there's one online that we can join. And socializing is important, staying connected, joining a support group, traveling, doing the things that you were doing, only you just have to learn to plan better. You have to plan around your medication times. You have to plan to have assistance when you need it. And I mean, just little things like that can make a huge difference. And I would say, in closing, probably the biggest thing is having a sense of humor about it. And I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Yes, my wife just reminded me that Emily is actually working for a living. So she has a patient at the end of the hour. So I was thinking maybe, Emily, might be, if you feel okay about it, how about you talking about what you do for folks with Parkinson's? Is that okay? And then we'll come back to Eileen, and then you can all ask your questions.
That's great. Mike, thanks for thinking of that. And it's so good to see you. And I missed you guys. My adopted parents and my real parent is here too. So thanks for coming, Dad. But yeah, so I had the pleasure of getting to work with Marky and Mike and Eileen with the Lee Silverman Voice Training Program. That's what LSVT stands for. It was developed at first to help with the low voice quality. And a lot of the principles really transfer over for voice to the motor part of it. So the whole point of LSVT is to get you doing things in a big way. So it's going through the full range of motion. And you're also looking at the amplitude. So you're trying to increase the speed, but with quality. And they found that those are the big things with Parkinson's that get affected, are that you kind of reduce the range of motion you have. So you tend, kind of to get hunkered in this way, head comes down, voice gets quieter. It's like your whole world turns in. And so LSVT, the focus is, let's see if I can, sorry. So one of the first posture is you start big. Oh my goodness, let's see if I can remember. Start big, out big, down big, up big, back big, and you hold. Marky, thank you. So that's one of them. And then the other one, start big here, rotate, and you're getting a lot of trunk rotation, trunk extension, head extension, posture. Another thing we always do with the exercises is sit to stand. So like Marky was saying, just getting out of a chair can become difficult, especially with Parkinson's when you have the freezing. So the 4 cardinal signs of Parkinson's are rigidity. So that's just your muscles aren't moving as well. Once you start kind of moving them more, they tend to move better, but find like the kind of the ratchety movement that's typical with Parkinson's. The other one is bradykinesia. So that means slow movement. So your movements are slower than normal speed. You also have, oh my goodness, I'm blanking. So there's 2 more, but okay, tremor at rest, and then hypokinesia, so kind of smaller movements. So, the tremor, it kind of, I haven't found anything that really helps with that other than maybe decreasing stress. But I think with the LSVT, that routine of doing it, so the LSVT program is done, these guys work hard when they go through these. So it's 4 days a week with me for an hour every day. And, we're all yelling during the whole session because you have to be loud. And it's, you're doing, up 4 to 10 reps of each exercise. And you do that for 4 weeks. So, and then they're expected to practice once on their own too. So every day you're doing this twice a day. So the value of this program is the intensity of it. They've shown with, neuroplasticity, the brain really responds to that increased intensity to really kind of make changes. So it's really trying to pack in a lot into a small time frame. The other parts of LSVT, you have the exercises, and then we do work on functional tasks. So we look at different tasks that the person is doing in their home, maybe reaching to a cupboard or preparing a meal or writing a letter, and you break it down and you just work on those little pieces of it. I had a patient who was having trouble waving with her left hand, and so we really worked on kind of that wave constantly. The hard part with this is that they have to keep practicing. So with this LSVT, you do the program with me, but then it's, encouraged to maybe try to incorporate it into your day, maybe throughout the rest of your life, if you feel that it helps you. And I think the benefit is kind of what I was saying, it counteracts a lot of the things that tend to be going on with Parkinson's. And Mike's presentation is wonderful. I hope you're going to be able to give that, Mike, your PowerPoint. But it really talks about Mike and I's experience in the home setting. And I also got to do that with other people too, like Marky, and going to the home because of COVID. We were isolating and keeping people that were more vulnerable or at risk more isolated, so that I'm coming to them, but they're not having to interact, get into the community as much. And that was a really, really special, great experience. Darn it, I told you.
What I can attest to, and I don't know if you might mention this, Marky, but I will. A sad part about Parkinson's is apathy. and you tend not to really want to do things. You sit in your chair. I think you mentioned that. Well, when Emily was coming to see me 3 times a week, 4 times a week, I couldn't sit in my chair, and I couldn't be apathetic, or she'd kick my butt. Unfortunately, since I have moved to Colorado Springs, I've been feeling a little down and low. And it's amazing how quickly the hunching comes back, the shoveling chair. So I promise you, Emily, from now on, I am going to do those dutifully every day, twice a day, just like you told me to. And I'm going to report to you. Okay?
Good.
Hi,
I'll make
Golly,
you
we'll
sign
get
a
back on
contract. Thanks, Mike.
Well, I think COVID has also contributed to the inactivity, at least the social aspects, especially.
Yeah, I agree, Marky. It's the things that you guys were doing in the community that were kind of keeping that apathy at bay, maybe, and kind of trying to be involved and have that motivation. And you're locked in your house, it feels like, and it's like, what am I supposed to do for exercise? I mean, luckily, when I was working with Mike and with you guys, we were able to walk outside. It was nice enough, but when it gets snowy and icy, that becomes a little bit more difficult. But there's lots of creative ways, and you can keep yourself pretty active in your home, just with those exercises and kind of doing other things. You can be pretty creative, and it works really well because it's really functional. It's what you're trying to do. So that's good to do it and practice it. So I think that's really everything I have in a nutshell. If anyone has any questions, I guess the one thing I did want to mention is I did some research just on the prevalence of Parkinson's, and it's expected. They do their studies. It's 2020 now, and the most recent research is really looking at what actually came up in 2010 because it just takes so long to synthesize it. But in the United States alone, they're expected to have an increase in Parkinson's up to 1 million people. And they've done surveys over kind of North America, the prevalence back in 2000. So I meant to say in 2020, they're expected to have 1 million people. 2010, the prevalence was about 572 people per 100,000. And then they're expecting that to go up to, I think, greater than 650 out of 100,000. So things are increasing, not just in the United States, but in the whole world. And it seems like some populations may fare a little better, but it is something that we need more research. It really is so valuable to have these people that are willing to try new things and continue. You guys are also amazing on what you can contribute to the work being done to figure out Parkinson's. And I think that maybe there isn't a cure yet, but you never know. So that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Emily. Before we get into questions, is Eileen are you here?
I'm here.
Yeah,
Okay, I think we ought to let the
she is on phone,
citizen
so
of Parkinson's finish us up here. And I say that with a big smile because you're a wonderful person. You work harder than anybody else at this, and I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. My presentation covers a lot of the same information that you've heard already, but it fills in some gaps that I think are worth talking about. First, I'd like to ask that you ask yourself why you are here. I don't know that there are many people who would want to come to a luncheon event and talk about chronic disease. So I'm curious you don't need to answer verbally, but think about why you came to this presentation. I'd also like to know when you became aware of Parkinson's disease. You know, I think back to when I was a kid, and I didn't know anybody who had Parkinson's. I didn't know that the disease existed. And now, my third question is, how many Parkinson's patients do you know? And it just seems anecdotally that it's very common to run into someone who was recently diagnosed, has had the disease for a number of years. And that corresponds to the fact that it is growing. The incidence of the disease is growing, and also there are more of us aging people around to get the disease. The incidence of Parkinson's is greater than the combined incidence of multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy, and ALS combined. So we are a real presence in the population. Now this one will have an impact. The cost for caring for and lost wages and all the various aspects that go into figuring the impact of the financial impact of a disease like this is reported to be $52 billion a year. So it has a big impact on our society. And the last data point that I have is that there's a new diagnosis in this country every 9 minutes. In other words, there's a new person that goes on to these statistics for having Parkinson's every 9 minutes. So why do I want you to know these things and learn about Parkinson's? Because as Emily alluded to, we need to draw attention to it. We need to make sure that it becomes a priority in research and in the legislative world, because there's a lot of us now, and there's going to be more and more. I wanted to say a little bit more about what Parkinson's is. It's a disease of the nervous system, and basically, the most reduced way of stating it, brain cells are dying, and these brain cells are responsible for producing a neurotransmitter, which is a chemical that carries a message from one nerve to the next, and the dying cells mean that the dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter, is diminished. We don't have enough of it. The impact of the reduced dopamine is far-reaching. The list keeps getting longer and longer. The tremor, the stiffness, the pain, and then there are non-motor skills, speech, vision problems. I now have developed a dual vision, which is quite annoying. A lack of focus. I think that relates to what Mike was saying about apathy. Multitasking, which is such an important part of our world. It's especially hard for a person with Parkinson's to do it. What can be done about all these symptoms? I want to just mention a couple of things that have had an impact on my life. One is exercise, and I think everybody on this little group would agree that exercise is just absolutely critical. And I have done everything from yoga and dance and LSDT to currently kayaking, which has been a wonderful experience down on the lake. And most recently, I have taken up the boxing program called Rock Steady. which is fun and very effective. There are certain dimensions of boxing that are common to other forms of exercise, but there's something unique about the boxing that seems to have a very beneficial effect. One other point that I would make, this is not only a disease for an individual that an individual can contract. It infiltrates your whole life, your relationships with your partner, your family, and I think it bears mentioning that it's really important to talk about it and to make plans for the future, anticipating that your condition is going to evolve and have even a stronger impact on your relationship. And it's not easy being a caretaker. It's a challenging job because like I see in my friends Marky and Mike, we are independent. We want to do things for ourselves, and yet there are things that we can't do. So we don't want to. We want to understand what our partner is experiencing, and be gracious about accepting support and help, and say thank you every once in a while. That's about, in a nutshell, what I want to share with you today. Mike, back to you.
Thank you very much, Eileen. We'll take a little question. Mike, why don't you go first, and then we'll take questions, okay?
Okay, well, I have to apologize for my gear here because I can't hear a lot of what people were saying, but I get the gist of it, and I know it from the inside. One of the difficulties I have is multitasking. Trying to do something here on the computer, talk to my wife, that's just too much to deal with at one time. So I kind of get grumpy and say, hey, people, one at a time. So I don't know how many people deal with folks with Parkinson's, but I can see where it could be a pain in the ear because we tend to be very, very limited and try to withdraw and all that stuff. So don't let us do it. Don't let us do it at all. Emily didn't let me, Linda won't let me. And I'm sure if Eileen were around, she wouldn't be letting me either. So I have yet to make connections with the support groups here simply because of the COVID thing, but I'm going to do that as soon as I can. And I started to work on a plan of the day. The plan of the day does include exercise, exercise, exercise. So that's the way to lick this thing. Questions from anybody? And remember, I can't hear. Virginia,
Yes.
did I see you had a question?
No.
Okay.
Mike, I'll step in with a question, and maybe Emily's the one to answer this. How many people do we know that are active Parkinson's people in Wallowa County right now?
Okay, I'm not from Wallowa County. I'm from Whatcom County in the state of Washington, northwest corner. But
Yeah, I thought maybe Emily could answer that, but maybe.
Okay.
Oh, I actually don't know, Rich. I'm wondering if maybe Mike does, but my limited, I have pretty limited knowledge as far as who has Parkinson's in Wallowa County.
Okay.
Well, what I can say is our support group which I hope is still active, used to go about as many as 11 folks. A couple of those were spouses. So I figured that being the percentage, as I recall, of people with Parkinson's against the whole population was something like 3%. So I figured there should be 21 people in the county who had Parkinson's, and I went from there. But there's really no way knowing. It's not something you go bragging about. But I'll tell you, if you lived with it for a while, you can sure spot folks who are suffering from it pretty quickly.
This is Cheryl. I was just wondering, Marky was saying how it's very difficult to be diagnosed, and I was wondering how you go about that. Is that a blood test? Is that scans? And when you're first diagnosed, how long do you think you had already had Parkinson's? And is there medication that they recommend when you're first diagnosed?
I think go ahead, Eileen.
I was just asking who the question was directed toward.
Oh, well, I think I want each of you, because it sounds like each of you have different stories. So let's start with Mike, and then Eileen, and then Marky.
Okay, start with me. Are we talking about tests, medications, or what? Both. Well, basically the outer symptoms are this hunching over, shuffling, loss of smell is one of the first ones to go. And then of course the tremor. And in fact, most people don't get diagnosed until they have the tremor. And then folks are saying, well, it's just essential tremor. So they don't want to give you this bad disease until you're down to the end and there's nothing left. But that's the way it goes. There's a test that tests for some sort of a protein or a gene or something like that. And I don't know much about it, but I'm not sure that it finds everybody. And the medication, the standard medication is something called Cinemet, which is essentially a dosage of the neurotransmitter we're missing. Oh, help me.
Carbidopa, levodopa.
Yeah. Carbidopa, dopamine. But you know, that works for a while, and its effectiveness wears off. You have to take more and more frequently, and after a while, it loses its effectiveness. But it's a great boon for us folks. I use it a lot. Somebody else want to chime in?
Yeah, this is Eileen. I had multiple misdiagnoses. The first diagnosis was that I had a pinched nerve in my neck, which was causing the tremor. And 3 or 4 times that the actual the correct diagnosis was missed. There is no clinical test. It is possible to get inside the brain and measure the extent of the dying cells, but it's very expensive and risky, and it's not something that neurologists would want to do every day. So they do these performance-based tests and collect information about your life experiences and assess come up with the diagnosis that way. I've taken Cinemet for probably 20 years now. It is still very effective for me. I couldn't function very well without it. And I think the best way to handle the medication is to have a good relationship with your neurologist who can monitor the impact of changing doses or changing medication. And there's lots more medications coming out now than there was when I was first diagnosed. So that's encouraging.
I don't know, since I'm having trouble hearing, I don't know if anybody's mentioned the operation that is sometimes done, folks, called deep brain stimulation. And basically, it's sort of like a pacemaker for your brain instead of your heart. Drill 2 holes in the top of a hole in the top of your head, put electrodes there, lead them down to a little machine on your chest here about the size of a pacemaker. And it gives you jolts and supposed to help things out. And it does help things out, but I figure my age, I've got enough holes in my head already, and I don't need a couple more to leak or something like that. Plus the idea of a pacemaker, I'd rather be dependent on a medication than I would a little electronic machine. I've had enough with electronics lately.
Yeah.
Marky.
I just wanted to mention that one of the things that was really helpful to me was I had a consultant that kind of walked me through the different steps. He's the director of neuroscience in Spokane, and we had a lot of telephone conversations, but basically he told me about the difference between a general neurologist and a movement disorder neurologist. And a movement disorder neurologist is one who specializes in Parkinson's, and they can identify all the things that we've talked about as being symptoms of Parkinson's, because as Eileen said, there really isn't a test that you can give. For instance, in my case, I had a brain scan to eliminate MS and other diseases that would show lesions in the brain. But since I didn't have lesions, what they said was I had the typical aging brain, which wasn't very heartening. but,
Thanks, Marky. And I see Emily had to go to see a patient maybe. There was one other thing that fired by my brain here, and I thought I would mention. I use a lot of alternative help, massage, acupuncture, herbal remedies, yoga, deep breathing, and frankly, I think it's very, very beneficial. Now, I know a lot of people don't have the funds to devote to that or don't believe in it, but golly, they were treating Parkinson's before they had all that medication and stuff. My guess is there's a shaman or somebody someplace buried in the deep of Africa and knows exactly what to do. Judy.
I read an article
Jane
just
had
yesterday.
Jane had her hand up.
Yes. Can you hear me? I read an article just yesterday about hiking poles, and it said that they are very beneficial for because of the rhythm and probably the expansion that Emily was talking about. Also, drumming is supposed to be very good. And so, Marky, we can probably go out in back of Eileen's field and drum together. I have several drums here.
Let's do
I'm willing to do.
And I do use the hiking poles. Those really are helpful.
Great.
Yeah. Emily?
Judy, did
There you came
want to
on.
ask something?
I think
I'd like to add something. I think there are a lot of grades into your kind of self-treatment, but for me, it was very important to learn how to at the beginning of the day, kind of assess where I was at. Was I anxious? Was I inclined to try to do too much? And kind of set the stage for the day and say, okay, I know those multitasking, can do everything at the same time tendencies are going to come up today, and I really need to watch it. And that kind of background adjustment of my attitude helped me make best use of all these wonderful therapies and it would only make things worse. So it's the early morning check-in with myself that seems to help a lot.
I found that the early morning, just getting up and going out and walking, especially with Eileen, and we kind of actually assess together.
Yeah.
But just getting up and out makes such a difference, because when I come back, I feel totally different than I did when I left.
Judy Weinschneider, or have you had your hand up how many times now trying to ask you a question?
You got to unmute, Judy.
Yes.
Judy, either click on the mute thing to the left on the bottom of your screen, or sometimes you can just push down the space bar and hold it.
Rich, I think Judy needs to check her volume level because she's not muted, but we're not able to hear her.
Oh.
Okay. Okay, Judy, you check your volume level, and then does somebody else have a question or a comment while we're waiting for her? Nancy, you're on. Do you have a question or a comment? Well,
I thought
Judy, you're muted now.
My comment would be that this is the second time I've heard this presentation. I was fortunate enough to be able to hear the presentation when they presented to Rotary probably 8 weeks ago. I learned something more each time. I so appreciate their candor and sharing with all of us. And to answer your question, Eileen, about why I feel it's useful to participate in this, is we are a community. You are all very important part of that community. I think the better we can understand one another, but also understand what one another are dealing with, the better friends we can be and the stronger community we have.
It's a beautiful
Well said, Nancy. Go ahead, Eileen.
Oh, I was just thanking Nancy for expressing that thought, and I definitely feel the warmth and caring of this community. I'm very, very grateful to be here.
Judy, are you going to try again? You're muted again. Do you want to try your question again, or do you want to type it in the chat box if you can? Unmute yourself first. Okay. You're unmuted now. Go ahead.
I can't hear her.
Yeah, I don't know what. You know, Well, I'll fill in here and ask you, Marky, because you had symptoms. In retrospect, you had earlier symptoms, and I'm thinking that looking back in my family, I think my mother might very well have had Parkinson's, and maybe an uncle. Is there a genetic? Are there a tie? Is there a tie-in genetically that we know of with Parkinson's?
They asked that, and the 23andMe particularly asks about a certain gene, which I can't remember the symbol of. Do you remember that, Eileen? But
No, I don't.
I didn't show that I had that gene, and I would not know with my family whether they did either. Actually, I grew up in New England and people didn't talk about things like that. They didn't talk about their illnesses, or it was just sort of something very private. But I do remember my grandmother and my great grandmother both had head slight tremors.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that was essential tremor, which is basically the genetic mutation, or whether it was a Parkinson's symptoms. I have no idea. But as far as I know, I'm the first one in the family to have it.
You know, the couple of things that ought to be noted here. First off, we're long-lived people now. Before, you know, when I was a kid, if you saw somebody that was 70, they were ancient, and there were 3 or 4 or 5 maybe in my little village. So people didn't live into Parkinson's times. And secondly, they had different names: palsy, dropsy, whatever it does, shaking.
Yeah.
The guys got the shakes. Yeah. So only recently that we put a name to this.
Mm-hmm.
I think
But-
that,
Having said that, if you don't mind, Eileen, we are all living
Go ahead.
longer, and we're going to see more and more. So better that we learn how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I think, Rich, that the common understanding now is that there is a genetic component. There's an environmental component also, which they're working on. And it's the combination of the disposition, the genetic disposition, and the environmental impact that are being investigated as causes.
What are those environmental factors that they're investigating?
The one that I read about the most in the literature is pesticides.
Yeah. Yeah, I've read a lot about that.
Well, speaking from
Okay.
my experience, I am considered a disabled veteran, 100% disabled. And the VA has a presumptive diagnosis that if you've been exposed to Agent Orange, perhaps in Vietnam, and you have symptoms that are Parkinsonian, you are in fact eligible for benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, pesticides are a big part of it.
So Judy is unable to get herself unmuted here, but I can say this: her father had Parkinson's, and he had worked for years in he had a virulent Parkinson's. He had worked for years in a steel alloy plant where he was exposed to a lot of stuff. And in Pittsburgh, you know, living in Pittsburgh or near Pittsburgh exposes you to a lot of stuff, or at least it did in those years from the 40s up through the 90s. But I think, Judy, nod if I'm right here. I think that you and the family always considered that there might have been some environmental factors involved in your father's situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Oh. Okay. Other questions or comments? And again, people, you can you can use your the chat box if you're having trouble. I'm sorry, all of our connections seem to have been a little bit molasses-like today. I don't know why that is, but remember the chat box. Remember that you can, as we pull this to a close, that you can continue on this chat box for a minute or two, that you can listen to the recording again. It'll be on our website. Cheryl will put it up there today or tomorrow. And that if you want to continue the conversation, you have my email. You can email me and I can forward stuff on to Eileen and Mike and Marky as well. And we can maybe even keep this conversation going. I saw a couple of comments on the chat box of people who have relatives who either have had or have Parkinson's. So I think there's more to talk about.
Rich,
Mike, you're the farthest away again. You gotta wind us up. You gotta be the cleanup hitter here, okay?
okay, well, certainly I appreciate that. I appreciate all the interest, and I appreciate your brown bag programs. And Rich, I especially appreciate your minutes on the pandemic. I mean, those are priceless and very wise. Well, I just want to say to all my friends in Malawi County, I really miss you. Love to be back. But if you got to be someplace other than Malawi County, Colorado Springs isn't bad. So think about that. Come visit. Nancy's been here. She knows.
Yeah, it's really nice there.
Okay.
I was so impressed, and they've got a wonderful, snug little abode. So, and a very comfortable guest bed. So, visit.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, Eileen or Marky, do you have final comments here?
Oh, just want to say thank you. And if you do have questions, don't hesitate to forward them to me. I'll be happy to talk with you about it.
You can come for a
Okay.
walk with us in the morning if you want to talk.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Eileen, safe travels back.
Thank you.
Have a good, safe Thanksgiving, everybody. And we have a brown bag next Tuesday, too, which will deal with a photography exhibit that just went up here.
Oh, great.
Bless you all and happy Thanksgiving to all.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thank you.